This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. It's already April. Is this the month Hillary Clinton declares for president? Clinton biographer Jonathan Allen says after she announces, she'll have to move to the left, but not too fast. Political scientist Thomas Schaller thinks the Republican Party is going to be hurt by the loosening of campaign spending rules because it means outside forces will seize power from party leaders. And Bill Press talks with Chicago political reporter Lynn Sweet. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Jonathan Allen, now the chief political correspondent for Vox.com, has written extensively about Hillary Clinton. He says one problem facing her likely presidential run is the history of infighting among her staff. And we say hello to Jonathan Allen, an award-winning reporter. He has written extensively about Congress and national politics, and he is co-author with Amy Parnes of the New York Times best-selling HRC, State Secrets and the Rebirth of Hillary Clinton. Jonathan Allen, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Always happy to be with you.
Yeah, great having you with us, too. The candidacy of Hillary Clinton has been a foregone conclusion for a long time, but didn't the delay hurt her, or I say hasn't the delay hurt her, by allowing a constant, unrebutted stream of attacks from the multitude of Republican contenders?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for the idea that she could get out there and really strongly defend herself. But at the moment, a lot of those attacks fall short because there isn't somebody engaged in the fight, and eventually the Republicans are going to have to fight each other rather than her to try to prove themselves. So, I've yet to hear the clear and convincing argument that jumping into the race as early as possible is a good idea for her.
Mm-hmm. Some of her recent speeches seem to be aimed at galvanizing the women's vote. But in the midterm election, weren't women, even single women, trending more Republican than in recent elections? What is her strategy here?
Yeah, the Democratic advantage was less in 2010 in 2014 than it had been in 2012 and some of the previous elections. But I think you have really different electorates in presidential elections than you do from midterm elections, and still Democrats have an advantage with women. So it should also be said arguing for equal pay is not necessarily an issue that is just aimed at attracting women voters, as Amy Parnes, my co-author, and I wrote in the book. This is also a way to communicate with men. There are a lot of fathers, brothers, husbands, sons, nephews who don't want to see the women in their families treated poorly in the workplace, don't want to see them make less money, particularly if you're a husband and wife. Like, I think most husbands would like as much money as can come through the front door as possible. Certainly don't want their wives being discriminated and making less money than people in the same position. So I think on issues like that, we're talking about family pocketbook issues and just framing them in those terms of equality for women, opportunity for women. I think that those themes actually reach out to a lot more people than just women.
Yeah, different audience than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. Some progressives, and I'm thinking of those supporting Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, think Hillary Clinton is too close to Wall Street to carry a populist banner. Do you think she'll have to move left to shore up support in the primaries?
I don't think she needs to shore up support in the primaries so much as just make sure that the Democratic Party is happy to have her. Look, she's got to move, and has already sort of moved left in her rhetoric. The question is, what are the policies going to look like, and are they any different, better or worse than those of President Obama or anybody else who's on the ballot in 2016? I have a tendency to think that she's got a balancing act to do, which is to move a little bit left without moving left so fast and so furiously that she looks disingenuous. And I think she risked that late last year she did an event for Martha Coakley in Massachusetts where she said companies don't create jobs, and then she had to sort of go back and clean that up later. And I think it was an example of a time where she kind of overdid it, where she her reaction to the pressure from her left put her in a place that seemed just terribly uncomfortable for her politically.
How much of a burden, Jonathan, is the infighting within Hillary's camp?
I think it's a huge problem for her. I think that there are a lot of people within her world who are most interested in their position within her world and less interested, or at least willing to sacrifice sometimes what's best for her. It probably often comes from a genuine place where they think their advice is the best, and somebody's beating them. But too much of their infighting spills out into the public domain, and that can really rob a campaign of momentum. It doesn't necessarily hurt a government as much, but campaigns really need to be unified to work. And I think if she starts suffering in the 2016 campaign, you're going to see a lot of her own staff starting to throw her under the bus.
Presumably, if she is the Democratic nominee, President Obama would fully support her. What about Joe Biden or anyone else if they challenge her in the primaries? And do you see that happening? Because there has not been a whole lot of noise of anybody else. I mean, there have been a lot of people asking for Elizabeth Warren, but
I think the president has all but concluded that Hillary Clinton will be the Democratic nominee in 2016. He certainly doesn't have to come out and say anything early. He'll certainly support whoever the nominee is. I can't imagine him getting involved in a primary if there is one. The fact that he has not endorsed Joe Biden for president, given that he has twice told the American public that Joe Biden is the next most capable person to lead the country, is telling, I think, of the president's conclusion that Biden probably will not be the Democratic nominee. I think in terms of other candidates getting in, Martin O'Malley just decided not to run for Senate in Maryland, so I think it looks like he's pretty committed to running for president. Bernie Sanders could get in. I'm sure there are a couple. Jim Webb could get in, but none of them. Each of them would have a huge hill to climb to get themselves in the position to have a competitive race with her, and I, at this point, don't see that happening.
Yeah, pardon me. From an electoral viewpoint, maybe it is electrical. Is she better off facing Jeb Bush rather than a newcomer like a Scott Walker, perhaps on the basis that the Clinton brand might be more popular than the Bush brand?
I think it's too early to tell. I don't think we've seen either Jeb Bush or Scott Walker in the national crucible yet. Enough to know which of them would be better under which circumstances.
Jonathan Allen, award-winning reporter, co-author with Amy Parnes of the New York Times best-selling HRC, State Secrets and the Rebirth of Hillary Clinton. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Thomas Schaller says that while Republicans may have a lock on Congress, House Speaker John Boehner is now a dinosaur trying to survive, with 70% of his caucus elected after he was. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
At last, America's political leaders indicate that they now feel the pain of the poor and of the millions of working families slipping out of the middle class. Congress had previously paid no attention to the ever-widening chasm between the rich and the rest of us, but it has recently emerged as a central issue for such Republican presidential contenders as Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Marco Rubio. They're publicly lamenting the wealth gap and, by gollies, proposing solutions. Alas, though, the solution proposed by each of them is not to provide help for those who've been knocked down, but to offer aid to the same corporate elites who've been knocking down the middle class and holding down the poor. Specifically, their solution is to cut taxes on corporations and the rich, do away with environmental and labor protections, and cut or privatize government programs, from Head Start to Social Security, that ordinary people count on. For example, Senator Rubio proposes to kill the food stamp program, even though the need for it is greater than ever, and redirect that money into what he calls a subsidy for low-wage workers. Does he think we have sucker wrappers around our heads? That's not a subsidy for workers, but for low-wage employers. Why should taxpayers subsidize the poverty pay of profitable giants like McDonald's, rather than making them pay living wages and cover their own labor costs? This is Jim Hightower saying, I guess we should count it as progress that candidates are at least having to admit that inequality is a problem. But come on, offering the same old failed anti-government snake oil is an insult to the American people. Jeb Bush shows how vacuous their flimflammery is by saying that, to address the ever-widening wealth and income gap, he'll, quote, celebrate success and cherish free enterprise. Gosh, what a comfort that'll be to America's hard-hit majority, huh?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you. The Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political scientist Thomas Schaller says the polarization in Congress is so great that all Republicans are farther to the right than any single Democrat. Another way of putting it is that the most conservative Democrat is still to the left of the most liberal Republican. And we say hello to Thomas Schaller, a professor of political science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And he is a weekly political columnist for the Baltimore Sun and the author of a new book, The Stronghold, How Republicans Captured Congress but Surrendered the White House. Tom Schaller, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Since the theme of your book is the Republicans' choice to forego winning the White House in favor of maintaining a lock on Congress, let me ask you, if there is a Republican presidential candidate who can broaden the party's appeal?
Well, let me be clear. Obviously Republicans, like Democrats, would love to control the entire government, but I start from the premise that by the time we get to the end of the Obama era, we will have had 44 of the last 64 years of divided government. And so, though both parties would like to have the whole thing, if they had to choose, my basic argument is that Republicans should want Congress rather than the presidency, which of course is the reverse model of the early period, and starting from Eisenhower to Reagan and Bush, when the Republicans did better in presidential elections and the Democrats dominated Congress in the last 20 years, has been the reverse. Now, I think for the Republicans looking forward, and one of the things I talk about in the end of the book is you finally are seeing Republicans, including Republicans in Congress, saying we need to nominate governors, not senators. We need to nominate people who are not from Washington. There's a quote from a congressman in there, a Republican congressman, who says, I don't want to nominate anybody in 2016 who hasn't at least been governor of his or her state, even if they later went to the Senate. Putting Paul Ryan on the ticket, yeah, that's good for the base, but he's only running for vice president with Romney, and of course Romney was a former governor, unlike, say, McCain. You want somebody who doesn't come of Washington, who only gives speeches and casts vote, who's actually managed and governed something. And I think you're hearing that theme, obviously in a self-interest way, from people like, John Kasich or Chris Christie, because they're governors. But I think it's a critique of sort of a Ted Cruz candidacy or a Marco Rubio candidate. So I think you should look at the party sort of cut two different ways. You have the establishment candidates, and in that block I would put, say, John Kasich, Mike Pence, Chris Christie, and certainly Jeb Bush, right? And maybe, I'm never sure where to put him, Mark Warner, because he's a bit of a polarizing figure. And then you clearly have the anti-establishment wing, which is not always on the same page. You have a more social conservative wing, which is Rick Santorum if he runs again, and Mike Huckabee, who looks like he's going to run. And then you have a more radical isolationist constitutionalist wing, which is Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. And so arguably, and the argument I make here is you want somebody, if the Washington, conventional wisdom among the Washington establishment is right, you want somebody in the first group who can really win and who has been a governor, and most of those guys already have been governor. Obviously, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, John Kasich, and so forth, maybe a Mitch Daniels. So I think the Republican Party is trying to move to people who are not just ideologically centrist and clearly not from either the isolationist or the social conservative religious wing, but also people who have executive experience. And given the history of the winning the presidency, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, being a former governor is a pretty good plum in your sort of your resume.
Yeah, absolutely. There used to be a time when some Democrats voted for conservative ideas and some Republicans voted for progressive ideas, and in that lay the seeds of compromise. Today, are all Republicans farther to the right than any Democrat?
They really are, and that's just not a matter of opinion, Jim. One of the things I write about in the book is, and this is no mystery, is how much the country is polarized. This is true among masses. When we look at people's view of the president, the approval rating of Democrats of Obama minus the disapproval rating of Republicans of Obama is at record highs, and the presidents with the most polarizing public ratings in the last, since Gallup's been taking numbers for 50 years now, are the last two presidents, George Bush and Barack Obama. And that either means these are the two most polarizing presidents in the last 60 years, or the country is just really polarized on how they view the presidents, and I think it's the latter. But it's also true for elites. Our congressional scholars like Poole and Rosenthal have tracked every vote in Congress since 1789, and they can attest that there are record low numbers of mixed party votes, that there's a high record number of party line votes where not a single Republican votes with a single Democrat. In the book, I talk about how in 1982 there were 58 senators in between the sort of, and your radio listeners can't see this, but imagine your fingers kind of dovetailing. The most liberal Republican, who William Buckley and conservatives ran out of Connecticut, Lowell Weicker, was actually to the left, far to the left, of the most conservative Democrat at that time, Nebraska's Ed Zirinsky. And in fact, there was so much overlap between their two ideological spaces that 58 senators were in between them. Well, by 1994, the number of tweener senators between the sort of liberal most Republican and the conservative most Democrat had fallen to 34, and by 2002 it had fallen to 7, and by 2010 and since then it's 0. In other words, the most conservative Democrat is still to the left of the most liberal Republican Congress. There is no overlap ideologically between the two caucuses, and this is a problem, I think, for both parties at a certain level, especially as they try to govern, because there's just really no bargaining range between two parties that have almost zero overlap.
How bad is it that we're now, we're a nation of national parties, like in Europe, where you vote for the name brand instead of the individual?
Well, I travel a lot, particularly in presidential years, to lecture about American politics on behalf of the State Department to various audiences, college audiences, and, sometimes federal legislators, members of the media, think tanks, and so forth. And they always ask me, like, what do you think about your two-party system? Wouldn't you rather have a multi-party system? And then I sometimes go into countries and I'm like, and they're like delighted that they wish they had a two-party system because there's instability in multi-party systems in Europe. I mean, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is there's a high degree of stability. You're not like in Italy forming a coalitional government every 9 months and you have a prime minister who serves for 6 months and then is out again because a few party members shift and then he's back in again and then he's out again. That creates a lot of instability for politics and ultimately for the economies of those countries. The downside of our two-party system, which is really driven structurally by our single-member districts and plurality rule, there's no way for third-party candidates to win any seats or any electoral votes. I mean, Ross Perot got 20% of the national popular vote in 1992, got 0 electoral votes because we have a first-past-the-post system. The downside of it is it's harder for ideas to sort of make their way in. Third-party fringe candidates essentially have to influence one of the two major parties, and I think you're seeing this a little bit more on the right now. I think you're seeing the isolationist, let's not go to war Rand Paul libertarian wing trying to infuse itself into the Republican Party. Literally, notice Ron Paul ran as the Libertarian Party nominee for president in 1988, then runs within the party the next 2 times he runs, and now his son, who was never a Libertarian Party nominee or candidate, is clearly ensconced in the party. So you see fringe movements, historically third-party movements, trying to work within the two-party system because barring a change, unless we went to list PR systems or multiple member districts and other forms of electoral structure, it's not not very likely that Green Party candidates and other third-party candidates are ever going to win any office. And if you can't win office, you can't change policy, and you certainly can't change the electoral rules. So, like it or lump it, we have a solid two-party system. The problem is it's a very polarized system, as we discussed in your previous question.
We're speaking with Tom Schaller, professor of political science at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, a political columnist for the Baltimore Sun, and author of a new book, The Stronghold, How Republicans Captured Congress but Surrendered the White House. Tom, is John Boehner a tool of the Tea Party, unable to bring them to compromise?
I think that criticism was stronger in January 2011 after the Republicans recaptured the House in that midterm cycle, and it was clear that the Tea Party movement had provided a counter-response that even the national Republican elites were unable to fashion themselves, and they, with cause, felt obligated to this movement, this very powerful, organic, and politically driven movement, which helped nominate and elect a significant number of Republicans. Even if, when you look at the, their winning records, Tea Party candidates were no higher of a win rate than non-Tea Party Republicans who won that cycle. But they contributed, and so I think Boehner felt that there was a lot of heat under him to accommodate. Now, I think with the 2012 election and certainly 2014, I think that heat is not gone, but I think the temperature has turned down dramatically. And I think the obligations that the quote-unquote establishment mainstream Republican Party in Washington here feels that it owes to the Tea Party wing of the party is much smaller. We'll see uprisings as we did when the new Congress took office with challenges from the Louis Gohmerts and other people who don't see eye to eye with John Boehner. But the real interesting, problem, if it's a problem for John Boehner, is it's almost as much generational as anything. 70% of his House caucus was elected after 2006. They've only been in now for, at most, 4 cycles, and some of them have only been in Congress 1 or 2 cycles, and some of them are rookies right now. John Boehner was elected in 1990, which you and I, it doesn't seem like that long ago. I was in graduate school at the time, but by comparison, he is a dinosaur in his own caucus. And this was a guy who was one of the young renegades and part of the leadership coalition under Gingrich. In fact, he was rumored to be the person leading the coup against Gingrich, if you remember, back in 95, 96. So right. John Boehner is an old hand, and he's managing a very young, very green caucus. So as red as it is, as much as it's moved to the right of him, it's also much more green, too.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the issues that will be lighting up the sky over the Capitol in 2015?
I think if I had to pick 3, and they're very different in terms of the pace at which the Republicans want to move with them, I would pick, obviously, Obamacare, energy, and immigration. And Obamacare, of course, they want to slow down, thwart, gut, otherwise repeal Obamacare. They want the government to move maybe quickly, but in reverse. And then with energy, they're clearly signaling with Keystone Pipeline, and if you live in Washington, as I do, there's ads almost on the TV every day, from the Petroleum Institute and so forth, because seizing on this opportunity, they're going to move very aggressively in terms of energy exploration and expansion. And then I think in the middle, you find immigration, which is a lot of strategic foot-dragging by Republicans because they have to please their socially conservative base that is anti-immigration, anti-amnesty, and has a certain degree, frankly, of xenophobia about immigrants, particularly immigrants coming from the Middle East and even immigrants coming from the Americas. But at the same time, the corporate wing of the party wants cheap labor. And so Republicans, I think, just are going to forever talk out of both sides of their neck because they want that labor there. They don't want to offend Latino voters, which they're going to have to try to appeal to at some point in the near-term future if they want to be a nationally viable party, because they're not going to be able to forever gerrymander the situation when the country gets less and less white. So they're trying to find a comprehensive solution that will solve the problem without offending their base, because if they lose their base on immigration, whatever policy gains or triumphs they make in real-world solutions for our undocumented workers in the country could be catastrophic for them politically and electorally.
Mm-hmm. There's a tendency to think of Republicans as that party of social issues, abortion, guns, traditional marriage, but wasn't the focus on social issues instead of economic issues the reason Democrats lost the Senate?
Well, it wasn't that the Democrats' positions were wrong. The Republicans were trying to de-emphasize and change the conversation away from social issues because the whole notion that the Democrats were on the losing side of the culture war, which I think was true in the mid-'90s, was true 20 years ago when you had Clinton, dissing Sister Souljah, and Clinton, attacking welfare, and Clinton soft-pedaling on DOMA and voting for a Defense of Marriage Act. Now it's very clear with the change generationally and the rise of millennials and much more tolerant on these issues than on gay marriage, marijuana use. I mean, this big Republican cycle of 2014, marijuana was also the big winner. How do you explain that, right? So Republicans, the sort of conventional wisdom now is to stay away from the social issues unless you're in like a super, super conservative House district somewhere, because those are the things that have blown up on people like Todd Akin and their forcible rape comments. Whereas the Democrats, this was their mistake. It wasn't that they didn't have the right position, but they didn't really address the economic critique of the Republicans, and they kept just running ads about how such and so candidate was going to be terrible on abortion, and such and so candidate was going to be terrible on immigration, and such and so candidate was going to be terrible on other social issue, gay rights or what have you. Maryland, where I teach, is a perfect example. Larry Hogan kept saying, look, I disagree with the governor and the Democrats in the state on abortion and gay marriage, but these are settled politics, and let's go talk about the fiscal mismanagement of the state. And Anthony Brown kept running ads. On a Senate race to take one, Mark Udall kept running ads trying to appeal to white, suburban, and middle-class women on choice issues, and he probably was in perfect alignment with them, but they wanted to hear what he said on the economy. So the Democrats' failure wasn't that they were in the wrong positions, but they were talking about the low salience issues when voters wanted to hear about the economy.
Is the influence of outside funding after the Citizens United decision going to kill the Republican Party because party leaders will no longer have that top-down power over its elected members?
Yeah, this is something I talk about at the end of the book in the concluding chapter in Stronghold, is that, the parties increasingly are losing control over their finances and over their candidates. And part of that is because of the influence of outsized money from corporations and unions for the Democrats and individual donors with the McCutcheon ruling who can, the old caps have been lifted, and there are new caps which basically allow a wealthy American to finance almost every congresswoman and his challenger or her challenger if he wants. You can think he can give up to like $3.1 million in total federal races now. It's ridiculous. Not that anybody would really give to every one of the 200, 300, 400 races or something like that. But the problem for Republicans with this is twofold. One is they're losing control of their party at a time when its message is a little bit murky, and they're a Congress-based party, as I argue in the book, and they don't have a clear and dominant presidential wing that's appealing to a broader national public. And that's going to lock in or cement these problems because the party can't recapture control of its own message and its own candidates. The second problem, as I argue in the book, is that when two parties are being influenced by corporate money, something that we talked about previously, when two parties are talking about corporate money and appealing to corporate America to get those dollars to financing, that's going to move both parties to the right. But when Democrats move to the right, that moves them to the center. And when Republicans move to the right, that just moves them to the extreme right. So if one believes, and I do believe this on a personal level, that we've seen too much influence of big money from either individual donors and or corporate sources, and that's bad for income inequality and the state of the law and bankruptcy laws and put all the policy aside. But from a purely partisan standpoint, that seems like that's good news for the Republicans, but in some senses it's pulling both parties to the right, which means pulling one party to its extremes, the Republicans, and one party to at least a little bit toward the center, the Democrats.
Okay. Tom Schaller, professor of political science at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, political columnist for the Baltimore Sun, and the author of the new book, The Stronghold, How Republicans Captured Congress But Surrendered the White House. Tom, as always, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Yep, you too. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks with Chicago political reporter Lynn Sweet.
Yes, indeed. On the political front, nothing more exciting than the big mayor's race out in Chicago, less than a week away. Nobody knows the situation there on the ground better than our good friend Lynn Sweet, who's Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, joining us on our news line this morning. Hey, Lynn, how are you?
Good morning, Bill. How are you?
Good. Haven't seen you in a while, anyhow, good to talk. So let's start with last night was the big debate, or the last big debate, I guess, right? Between
it's the last of three, yes.
Yes.
And the voting is Tuesday.
Right. How did it go last night?
Well, I can't really tell you that because I don't know that one on the debate. But I could say in general there is a lot of enthusiasm in the city. Not a lot of enthusiasm in the city, but there is a lot of focus in the city on this mayor's race. The key thing on Tuesday is going to be whether or not that translates into turnout, because it was so low in the first round that I was surprised that people were barely paying attention. And one of the things that's interesting in this, so the listeners know, this is a runoff, the final round of a runoff election. And one of the messages I think that Rahm Emanuel got very soundly in the first round is that even the people that liked him weren't coming out to vote for him, and that a lot of this was personality driven, because if he had gotten at least 50%, he wouldn't be facing another vote.
And it seemed, a lot of people outside of Chicago, maybe inside Chicago, were surprised that it's Chuy Garcia, right? Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah.
Jesus Chuy Garcia.
Right. That he was able to force Rahm. That Rahm didn't walk away from the first runoff with a victory. That he was forced into a runoff. So what is that just because people don't like Rahm?
You hit it. It's that simple. And I know that sounds hard to believe that a lot of that so much that is personality driven, but the other thing is that Rahm didn't have in the first round a good turnout, a good field organization, because if he had worked the wards where he could have votes, his voters didn't turn out. There is a sense of movement politics in Chicago like I have not seen in many years. People who are of a certain age remember what it felt like when Harold Washington was running for mayor. There also is, on the national look, I think people are surprised because Rahm, from the Washington press corps, had probably more friends than he does in the Chicago press corps, where the City Hall reporters are just... they look for different kinds of stories, and they're a very tough bunch. Is the movement on behalf of Chuy Garcia or on behalf of Rahm Emanuel? No, it's on behalf of Garcia. Especially the major national progressive organizations are all for Garcia. A lot of there is a lot of union interest and union money helping Garcia now. Particularly the teachers, right, played a major role. The teachers union, especially, and a lot of the whole movement to run against Rahm got started as a result of the Chicago Teachers Movement. The Chicago Teachers Union. Mm-hmm. But one interesting thing here is that some of the trade unions, a few of the trade unions, are for Rahm and have given him money. But the unions that have more of that are not the high-paid worker unions, commercial CWA, AFT, the transit union, they're the unions that are helping. The more grassroots-oriented. Absolutely. And he was in Washington last week at a fundraiser, and some of the leaders of those unions came out. So it's next Tuesday. Right. Right. And one other thing of interest: Senator Bernie Sanders will be in Chicago at a Get Out the Vote rally on Thursday for Garcia. For Garcia? Really? So yes, and he sees this. I did an interview with him that you could find if people look at my Twitter feed at Lynn Sweet. They could find the column. He puts the Garcia-Rahm race more in the context of the rise of interest in national progressive politics. Mm-hmm. So there is that context there. Rahm has his share of people coming in certainly to endorse him, but I think when I talked to Garcia last week when he was here, I think he's trying just to win 50 wards and isn't necessarily looking at the big national picture here. Well, President Obama endorsed Rahm Emanuel in the primary, and it didn't do him that much good, right? So it did not get him across the finish line. Interestingly, the White House, through the Democratic National Committee, released a picture of Obama filling out his mail-in ballot for Rahm just a few days ago.
Oh, wow. They're still trying to keep it. Now, how about the money? Does Garcia have enough money to be really competitive?
Well, he has been inundated by ads run by Rahm. Rahm has, I think it's maybe 10 million more. It is, Garcia will have a few million to be on TV, but nothing compares to Rahm. Because of the way the state campaign laws are, there are no limits in this particular mayor's race, and Rahm has been scooping in mega donations from jumbo millionaires, and that's been a point of contention.
Wow. So a lot riding on this, really. Yeah.
Hey,
Rahm in Washington is seen differently as Rahm in Chicago.
Yeah.
Lynn, I want to ask you about this viral image that kind of was kicking around last week. It's a picture of a very happy, smiling Rahm Emanuel with an African-American man who works at a health food store. And the guy put it on Instagram, and the caption is, "The mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, came by my job. Still can't stand that MFer, though." And it got a lot of traction, but it also speaks to how some people really view Rahm as maybe a little bit of a phony.
No, I think it's not phony. Mm-hmm. I think people see him as genuinely abrasive.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right.
And I say that even people who are fond of him say that. What got him through Washington to kind of this abrasiveness does not work when you're the key elected official, where you need buy-in from people. You could have the best policy in the world, but you have to get people to understand why they want you, why you should believe in it and follow it. And and he has a lot of policy ideas. The issue is, for his time in office, the city's bond rating is down. There's still problems with the pension. There's still problems with crime. And most centrally, what he did that I think sparked a lot of controversy is a few years ago he tried to close 50 public schools.
Right.
And, part of what you see today is the fallout from that.
Right. The mayor's race in Chicago. April 7 is Election Day, and Lynn Sweet with the Chicago Sun-Times. So it's suntimes.com, of course, but your Twitter feed is at Lynn Sweet, right?
Yes, at Lynn Sweet.
At Lynn Sweet. Follow Lynn. She does a great job and a good friend of the program, too. Hey, thanks, Lynn. Good to catch up with you.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you again soon. It's Rahm Emanuel versus Chuy Garcia. I think it's very significant that Bernie Sanders is going out there for this Get Out the Vote rally tomorrow. I think she said Thursday, on behalf of Chuy Garcia. Seeing it because this is part of the progressive movement that elected Bill de Blasio in New York and now Chuy Garcia in Chicago.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Jonathan Allen, Thomas Schaller, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.